What is your bullet dodged moment? Story 1. Not me, but I had a hand in it. Knew this guy in high school peripherally. He was in the cool crowd of rocker-type guys, and I was a nerd. New girl arrived at our school from another town. She and I became friends, and a few months later, she started dating him. At first she seemed cool, and we would talk about everything. At one point, however, she starts talking about how she has been hooking up with her ex-boyfriend behind cool guys' back. Just before the end of the school year, she tells me she is pregnant, and that she knows it belongs to her ex-boyfriend. She is laughing and really proud of herself, because cool guy is going to do the right thing. Withdraw his college application and go work at the local gas station to support her and the baby. Her ex, the father of the baby, is kind of a loser, so she thinks it's the best thing even that she can f*** him while making cool guy support her. I didn't really know this guy that well, but I got his phone number from an acquaintance of mine who knew it. Cool guy knew I was friends with his girlfriend, but was still pretty surprised to hear from me. I told him all about her ploy and said, "Get a paternity test, it isn't yours." This guy was incredibly stoic, but after a sizable pause he just broke down crying for a few minutes, then thanked me. They broke up, and cool guy went to college and made something of his life. Story 2. When I was 7, I got lost in Spain without my family. I had been lost for about 5 hours, really late at night, and had been going down some dark alleyways and car parks. I started asking random strangers if they spoke English, but there were only middle-aged men walking around alone. One guy didn't speak English but gave me a cuddle and took me back to his house around the corner. At this point, I'm crying my eyes out and just appreciated the help and kindness. When I got to his house, it turned out he had a family, and the son was learning English in school. He got out his school workbook and asked me my name. Then they took me to the police station. My parents picked me up about 10 minutes later as they were driving around in a police car. That man could have been anyone, and I could have been kidnapped and never seen again. Not your ordinary bullet dodge. Story 3. 2 girls I grew up with became my tightly knit friend group. We were the misfit goths in school. None of our parents paid attention to what we were doing, and we had total freedom at an extremely young age. One had anorexia, the other had a screwed-up home life. These were their defining plights, so that's how I'm going to define them here, but I was also pretty messed up myself at that time. I had a crush on a screwed home life girl. We had been getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the one with anorexia threw herself at me like in some very not subtle ways. Honestly, really hard to turn down the offer in the moment. I mean, she literally coaxed me into her bed when I had been sleeping in her mom's living room. Messed up home life was in a sleeping bag on her bedroom floor. The anorexic girl really wasn't someone I was interested in, and messed up home life was staying the night as well, in the same room on the floor. So nothing happened. I just kind of slunk off awkwardly after probably at best like a small over-the-shirt fondle. She had no breast tissue. And saying I wasn't feeling well. I just wasn't into her, and even though I was hormone-crazed, it felt wrong. I resisted the call of the siren and went back to the couch. To put into context how hard it was to turn this down, I would have lost my virginity that night. Instead, I pursued the girl with the messed-up home life. The one with anorexia threw the biggest, most dramatic fit I've ever seen in my entire life, including threatening suicide several times. Like no one has ever topped it, and someone later on had a breakdown in front of me, where they ended up committed against their will. Turns out, the anorexic girl was just hanging out with my now wife, because she wanted to have someone worse off than her around. She was a mean girl. Pretty sure the anorexic girl didn't even like me in the least bit. She just didn't want the other girl to get attention. She was trying to mess up my chances with the sad home life girl to keep her under her skinny thumb. Good thing I kept it in my pants, because that night the girl I liked was actually awake, listening to me turn down the anorexic one. She liked me back. A lot. We started dating. We were each other's first everything. I helped her emotionally survive her messed up home life, and somehow miraculously the messed up environment started fixing itself. Her mom got treatment or something. The more we were together, the happier we were. We both started volunteering and working on making our city a better place. We started saving money to move out together. We did everything we could to be better for ourselves and each other. I ended up marrying this girl. We've been together for 19 years. I have one of the happier marriages in this world, and that would not have happened if I screwed the crazy anorexic chick when she threw herself on me. Don't know where the other girl is these days. I rarely think about her unless I'm thinking about how I dodged a bullet. Story 4. I was talking to this girl at a party, and I was really into her. I have some obscure interests, and she was the first attractive girl I'd ever met with the same interests. Well, my brother swooped in and charmed her way more than my awkward ass could hope to. I was pissed at first that he stole her, but got over it after she lied about birth control, got pregnant, and tried to convince him to marry her. The thing is, I'm a lot more go with the flow than my brother is. If I had knocked her up and she told me we needed to get married, there's a good chance I would have done it. Then I'd be stuck with a person who I've learned is an absolute show of crazy. Story 5. Don't know if it's a dodge a bullet moment, but it felt like I did. Afghanistan a few years ago, having a smoke late at night with our local cultural advisor, LCA, and a bullet whistled right over our heads for my very first time. I looked at our LCA and asked him what the hell that was, and as he took another drag from his smoke, unfazed, he said with a thick Pashtun accent, "You freaking idiot. That was a bullet. You should sit down with me before you get your head shot off by the next round." And well, what can I say? My LCA saved my life, because as soon as I did sit my down on the Afghanistan dirt, another bullet came whistling by. Thank you, Bilal. Story 6. When I was about 23, I was asked on a date by a Brazilian girl who was maybe early 30s. We went on a date, but it wasn't the most interesting evening. We didn't really click, and the language barrier meant we couldn't really get past basic conversation. I was a little resistant to go on a second date and felt it was fair game to say, "Sorry, I didn't think we clicked." Next time I saw her in person, though, I was berated with a bunch of insults hurled as she claimed we were supposed to get married and have kids and that I was the one. Very glad I was able to back away slowly and dodge that bullet. She wanted that green card. Story 7. When I was back in high school, I was walking near the field when they were practicing their discus throw. One of the discus was wrongly thrown and was headed for my head. A friend who at that time was walking towards me saw this and yelled for me to duck. The discus went past my head and landed behind me. Then I realized that I could have died if my friend hadn't warned me. Imagine a 2 kg flying disc lands right on your forehead. Story 8. Senior in high school, and a pair of twin girls with obvious behavioral issues got pretty aggressive with me to hook them both. They lived a block away, so we rode the same school bus. I was getting a weird vibe and definitely had a "this is too good to be true" feeling from it. Every day on the bus ride home from school, they tried to convince me to come over to their place. They were super trashy, white, chubby girls, and I just didn't know how to handle it, so I basically avoided them until I got a car and started driving home instead of using the bus. Eventually, after a month or so of stupid flirting and stalking, one of them got one of the other kids on the bus to hook up with them. He got them both pregnant, one with twins. They lied and said they were on the pill. Both of them wanted him to marry them, and it got really bitter and nasty between the two girls. Parents kicked them out. He was black, and their parents weren't very happy. And then the dude had to bail on his college plans to support 3 kids and pay 2 women for child support at 18. They all got heavy into Oxy and are in and out of jail. You didn't dodge a bullet. You dodged a firing squad. Story 9. I had my police car pulled over off the side of this rural road with the emergency lights on. I had stopped because there was a man splayed out in the middle of the asphalt. Turns out he was super drunk and decided to take a nap during his walk home. I had just helped him to his feet and placed him in the back of the car to drive him home. When I hear an engine revving hard, I closed the car door and straightened up, just in time to have my car smashed out from in front of me by a pickup truck. I felt the truck's side mirror clip my body armor. The driver was drunk and had decided to go looking for his drunk friend. That friend was the guy I just picked up. The guy in the back seat survived the impact because those old Crown Victorias had massive trunks. The driver went to the hospital, and in the coming months, he pleaded guilty to impaired driving. I remember the collision analysis showed that the guy hit my car at 145 km/h. It was a wild night, and I still have major hang-ups when I have to stop my police car on roadways. Story 10. Went on a date once with the photographer from my cousin's wedding. I was in the wedding party, so we spent much of the day chatting. He was good-looking and amicable, so I figured why not. We went for coffee, and it was perfectly pleasant. We chatted about the usual stuff. He told me more about his upcoming photo tour of Europe. Nothing unusual, but nothing special either. Got an awkward one-armed hug at the end, and he said we'd get in touch when he was back, which was about 4 months' time. 4 months came and went, and I just let it go. It had been pleasant but tepid, and I guess I kind of forgot about it. Jump ahead a few years, and I'm browsing the news, and I see a familiar face. The photographer, who is now in jail for an unprecedented collection of unique child that he made. More of which, authorities guessed, was on the hard drive with military-level encryption they'd seized that police still couldn't crack years later. That photography tour of Europe? Yeah, he was in Thailand. Well, that escalated quickly to disturbing levels. Story 11. Back when I was young and impressionable, someone stopped me on the street and asked if I'd like to do a free personality test. After enthusiastically filling out the answers to a long list of probing questions, the person who'd approached me asked how old I was. Since I was under 18, they said they'd have to get a parent's permission to give me my results. They call my mum, who tells them to stick their test up their arse, or words to that effect, then proceeds to give me an extended talking to about trusting strange people with my personal information. And that's how I learned who the Church of Scientology were. Story 12. I should be sitting in jail. My life should be ruined for trafficking, but it's not. It's the opposite. Yeah, I dodged a bullet. Back in my raving days, in the early 2000s before it got trendy, I got deep into ecstasy use and subsequently became a small-time dealer. Small-time over the course of a few months rapidly became pretty big-time. One night after re-upping, buying more ecstasy to sell, I went over to my buddy's house to play Counter-Strike until the early hours of the morning. On my way home, I got pulled over. I had 2,500 green triangle ecstasy pills in my trunk. I pulled out my license and registration, laid it out on my lap before the cop came to my window, and proceeded to be as polite as possible. The cop asked me why my eyes were red and asked if I smoked weed. I said absolutely not. I never liked weird, I know. And I told him we were playing Counter-Strike for 8+ hours, and that's probably why. He ran my license, which was clean, came back to my car and said, "Okay, drive safely and let me go." I left that scene Had he looked in my trunk, I would have been arrested and looking at a distribution felony and at least 12 to 25 years. Not to mention, it would have destroyed my life. I stopped dealing and raving after that. Today I have a lovely wife, my own home, good health, thriving business, healthy toddler, and another one on the way. Talk about bullet dodged. My life and the life of those I love would have been drastically different if it played out the other way. It should have. I am the lucky one. I lose sleep often thinking about that. Story 13. Lived outside of St. Louis in my early childhood, woke up screaming in the worst pain of my life, and then felt my face get sprinkled with something. I actually got shot in the hip, and when I sat up, a bullet went through my window right where my head was just at. And what sprinkled me in the face was tiny pieces of glass. So I dodged a literal bullet by taking a bullet. So my bed was right next to my bedroom window, parallel to the wall. The end of the bed where my head was at was right next to the window. The bullet entered the wall and struck me in my left hip, so I guess I was sleeping on my stomach. The windows were real weird now that I think about it. It was actually 2 single-pane pieces of glass separated by 6-0. And since both of them had a hole in them, you could stick a rod in and see that the bullet traveled right where my head had just been on my pillow. Another side story connected to this now that I think about those windows. One time I came home from school, I noticed the inner window was shattered and there was blood all over the place. Turned out it was my dog that tried to launch herself through the window. We were pretty certain that someone was at my window scoping it out. She was super defensive of all of us. I'm pretty sure this actually occurred after the shooting. Story 14. I had a type of bone cancer, Ewing sarcoma, when I was 10. It usually shows up in the bone itself, which usually makes one lose whichever limb the bone is in. Mine, fortunately, started in the surrounding flesh and was working its way towards the bone. The tumor grew so fast that I only realized it when I bumped my leg against a rock that I should not have hit. The tumor was about the size of a softball. Because of finding it like this, we got to it early enough that it could be removed before it reached the bone. I still got 9 months of chemo to make sure it was all removed though. I kept my leg, although I have a large scar on the outside of my left leg, above the knee running to mid-thigh, and a large dip in the same area. Also have some kidney damage relating to the type of chemo they gave me, although things are looking up there. This May was 6 years cancer-free, and I would have lost my leg if we would have caught it any later. Story 15. New teacher started at my high school at the start of the year. Integrated fine. Students were assigned a pair of teachers to pay special attention to their academic needs. He was one of mine. Because of this, he knew I had a tense relationship with my parents. Because of the occasional sensitive material we covered in his English class, which I also took, he knew I had a telling sensitivity to violence. As a teacher, he knew I was a troubled kid with a shaky support network. He gave me off-base but evidently well-intentioned advice about managing my controlling parents, worked with me and my other overseeing teacher to try and make school less nightmarish for me, and overall seemed like a warm, engaging guy. He gave some people the willies, but I felt fine around him. Then, middle of the week a few months, into the year, he doesn't show up. We're told he's not employed here anymore. No official details. As you may be guessed, turned out he had an alleged history of sexually abusing students at past jobs. I don't know how it had been handled that they were able to find this out without him having tripped any of the flags I assume exist in the screening for potential teachers. But I guess better late than never. I don't think the school ever got, prosecuted for screwing up or whatever, so I guess it was an understandable miss. But yeah, that would have been pretty freaking awful. I got lucky. Me and any other kids, he might have been charming. Story 16. Saying bullet dodged really downplays the seriousness of this situation. When I was in my early 20s, I went out to the bar with some friends one night. My friend was designated driver, and I was drinking. I had a very solid buzz going on when I bumped into someone I knew from high school who was clearly flirting with me. I ended up leaving my friends and catching a cab back to her apartment. The next morning, I found out my friend who was supposed to designated driver got drunk then behind the wheel. He ended up getting into an accident, and while no one had any critical injuries, there were a few broken bones, etc. I could have very easily have been in that car. Instead, I had with my now wife. Talk about fate. Story 17. I was making a day trip in Colorado to do some sightseeing. It was just me and the dog, driving a few hours over Wolf Creek Pass. I felt a little off and stopped up near the top of the pass to get some fresh air at a waterfall. I figured I was just sleepy and at altitude, so I decided to actually hike the mile-round trip to the falls and wake up a bit. On the way back down the trail, I had a seizure. If I'd not stopped, I would have been coming down the pass when it happened. Story 18. Got dumped by my ex. Like a typical movie sad at the time, very anti-social duty, I was sad and depressed because I had been dumped. After all, I had been dumped for another man, so I did have a feeling of just not being good enough instead of being in a relationship that didn't work out. After a while, she starts sending some messages. We talk a bit and suddenly we start fighting. She was the first one I had opened up to and told my thoughts deep down that I hid for everyone else, and she threw them back in my face in the most hurtful manner. I was shocked. When I reflected about it, I realized she had been doing it during our relationship too. We'd have an argument, I'd present my points of view in a calm manner, etc., and she'd just suddenly fling to wind me up. Later found out she also had lied to me about her age and was just barely legal when we hooked up. Treated myself to a nice pizza and a good bottle of scotch to celebrate the dodged bullet. Story 19. I went on one date with a girl I worked with. She was cute, but there were red flags. Some obvious, some not so much. She had been in jail and had an ankle monitor. That was probably the biggest red flag. Other than that, she just seemed a little off. Things fizzled easily enough between us. No harm done, and we didn't even do anything to make life at work awkward. Then a coworker starts dating her, and before too long, both of them weren't working there anymore, for unrelated reasons. We end up finding out later, she murdered the guy. She stabbed him like 20, 30 times in the back with a kitchen knife. It was very sad. He was a good guy and definitely didn't deserve to go out like that. I learned this all secondhand from mutual friends after I had lost contact with him. Story 20. I ran out of fuel once. Normally that wouldn't be so bad, but I was flying a Cessna 152 over the Mojave Desert at the time. It's really not a bad glider. I had to land on the highway. The landing went perfectly. The CHP pilot, with whom I was in communication during my unpowered descent, landed at the nearby airport and brought me 10 gallons of avgas. I climbed on the wing and dumped it in. The CHP blocked off both ends of the road for use as a runway, and I took off into the sunset. Story 21. Skipped class to watch a segment on a morning talk show with my favorite actor. Avoided a school shooting. Had I gone, I would have been in the cafeteria right when and where the shooter started his spree. Story 22. Meningitis. 2:30 a.m. Couldn't sleep. 3:30 a.m. I'm having spinal taps done at a medical center. 2 doctors gave me 15% survival upon arrival. 24 hours later, I moved to ICU for the next 8 days. Last day in hospital, they told me I'd dodged a bullet matrix style and should not be here. Story 23. I once took a girl online out to dinner at a nicer place in our town. She was horrible to the server and actually got us kicked out because she called the manager a. After that, we were walking out, and she wanted me to go back to her place to watch a movie, which I refused and went home. 2 months later, I was reading the paper and saw her in the police blotter for assaulting her boyfriend with a golf club. Good thing she didn't ask you to go clubbing with her, then. Story 24. On temp job, I'd made several hours of corrections on a long document saving version after version. When finished, I deleted all the extra copies and emptied the trash only to realize the one copy I saved was the untouched original. It was a busy office, but as my heart sank, someone announced, "Everyone stop what you're doing. We just lost funding on the project. You'll be paid through the day, but you're free to go. Never empty the trash." Story 25. Dated this guy briefly in college. He got into a horse riding accident early on in the relationship. Horse fell on him, broke his ankle, pelvis, and hip. Apparently had a prior addiction to pain pills I was completely oblivious to. He quickly relapsed and turned into a crazy pill-popping psycho. Tried sticking it out and helping him. I did my best, and I couldn't handle it. When I told him I was done with the relationship, he proceeded to call me the worst names in the world, begged me to forgive him, and then tried asking me to come hang out after he had called me the biggest slut in town. He then started doing meth and has been involved in a hit-and-run accident. The guy he hit died. X moved the body, fled the scene, dumped his truck in a parking lot that had a surveillance camera in it. He did get caught for it. Talk about bullet dodged. I've had some pretty crappy relationships, apparently. Story 26. My family had lived in Dallas for my formative years, but around 20 they packed up and moved back to San Antonio, where I was born, to be closer to family. Initially, I followed them and transferred colleges. But after almost 2 years of unhappiness, it became apparent that this wasn't a good fit for me, and I wanted to move back to Dallas. Being incredibly close to my family, it was a difficult choice, but one I knew I needed to make. Flash forward a few months, I'm back in Dallas in a small studio apartment and re-enrolled in my original university. Having lived with a loud, boisterous family for 22 years means the silence of living alone is unsettling. I watch Sex and the City on repeat for background noise until I literally kill the DVD player and have to replace it. I start reconnecting with friends I had not seen in a few years, including my first love and boyfriend. He's elated I'm back and puts the moves on hard to get me to agree to date him again. I have a really fond place for him in my heart, and I'm not opposed, but I needed time to get adjusted to being independent and living alone. He's understanding and patient for about 2 weeks before he tells me if I won't date him, he has another girl interested. Should he go date her? A little annoyed at the tactic but supportive. Nonetheless, I tell him he should do what makes him happy. I then hear nothing from him for about 6 months. Our birthdays are a few days apart, and when I call him for our yearly birthday call, he says he's been meaning to talk with me, that he's going to be a daddy. The girl he dated got pregnant, and now he's getting married and starting a family. I asked if he loved her, and he said no, but he was stupid, so he had to make it right. I got off the call and thanked the stars that my little barely adult brain was smart enough to prioritize myself and well-being above being pressured to do something I wasn't ready for, to take the easy road and find comfort in an old love while doing some uncomfortable growing up. Story worked out, though. He's still married to her with a second kid, and they are going strong. Story 27. I was using a steak knife to try and unlock a bathroom door by trying to move the metal thing. I'm sure it's got a name, but I don't know what. Tumbler, maybe. Holding it into the door jamb. Stupidly, I was doing this from the bottom with as much pressure as I could manage, so when the knife invariably slipped, the blade slammed into my skull a tiny bit above my left eyeball. It took me 2 minutes to pull my hand away to check if I could see. I thought I had skewered my eye for sure, and definitely deserved to. Bullet dodged. Story 28. So in 2006, I was losing weight so that I could finally afford health insurance. I figured out that if I lost 60 lubs, a $5,000 deductible plan would be roughly $100 per month cheaper. In 2007, I've lost the weight and I get insurance on Feb 1 and go to get my first checkup in a long while. Everything comes back clean. March 15th. I go home and my dad, a physician, doesn't like the look of me and takes me to get some scans. Turns out the weight I lost was due to cancer, and the previous doc had f***ed up and not run the right tests. But because he had screwed up and given me a clean bill of health, the insurance company couldn't claim that the cancer was a pre-existing condition, despite my having insurance for 90 days. Cancer is all gone, but I didn't get stuck with a $500,000 hospital bill because of a doc who screwed up. Story 29. I had been talking to a guy for a couple weeks, and we'd gone on 2 dates, which were fine. I liked him enough to bring him to my friend's house for a small gathering. That night, he started acting really strange, like he was on something. I could sense that he was making everyone uncomfortable, so we ended up leaving early. I brought him home and went back to my own place. Later that night, my friend texted me that something had seemed off about him, and she had decided to Google the guy. She found some pretty weird stuff about him, weird videos he'd posted online that made him look like a total creep, and that he had a driving under the influence that he had lied to me about, knowing that my previous BF had a drinking problem. Needless to say, I ended things right then and there, although he texted me incessantly for about a week after. I was so glad I found out he was a creep before things had progressed anymore, and my skin crawled, thinking about what might have happened. Story 30. Well, just recently I had a job offer which never felt right in my gut. After the initial excitement of actually getting an offer wore off, was feeling kinda meh towards the position, but figured I could do it for a year or 2, since it would potentially allow for a better quality of life. However, when reading the contract, so many warning bells went off in my head. My husband works in employment labor law, so I had him review things. The first words out of his mouth last night were, "Don't sign that contract as it is." Some highlights include, keep in mind, I work in K-12 education, not some extremely secretive, cutthroat industry. A 1-year no-compete clause for any tangentially related position in the entire county, which, keep in mind, has the largest school district. 60 days written notice if I were to leave. Not crazy at first, but good luck getting a new job over the summer, which is when most schools post positions. If I decided not to return after signing a contract, I'd have to reimburse all insurance benefits starting from July 1st, 2017. Not sure if these are standard in other industries, but I've never seen anything like this as a teacher. Basically, it would make it close to impossible to leave this job, and I could potentially be screwed so many ways if I did. If this was what was in the contract, what could the work environment be like? Just sent off my thanks but no thanks email to the director. With the school year quickly approaching, looks like I'll be back at my current employer. Story 31. I dated this guy for about 5 months. He was charming and sweet. He said he had just moved into town, which was why he didn't have many friends other than family members. Well, some red flags started popping up and he was starting to become overprotective and extremely jealous. He also invited me on a float trip with him and his brother, and when I went, he told me that the float was to spread his mother's ashes because she had just died. I had no idea she died, and I had no idea this was the plan for the float. I ended things with him after this, and then found out a week later, from his cousin who I ran into at a bar, that he had been in jail for 3 years, previous to our relationship for domestic of his then-girlfriend and 2-year-old daughter. All of this I had zero idea about. He lied our entire 5-month relationship. Bullet dodged. Story 32. Almost slept with a girl in college. I was pretty into her, and ready to go, but had responsibilities in a final the next day, so I didn't bite. Kissed her goodnight, went back to my dorm. Studied for the next 4 hours before my RA calls me and tells me there's a girl down in the lobby looking for me. I go down to find her, with a 37-page love letter. Front and back, she had written about my kiss. She proceeded to hang outside my dorm room for the next 4 months. I had to start crawling out my window to get to class, and eventually ended up dropping out and moving to another state to avoid her. Flash forward to when MySpace came around. She sent me a message telling me she reads everything I post on there, even though she wasn't on my friends list. That was 7 years after I had moved to another state. Story 33. The city was doing road construction in front of our place about 3 years ago. It was annoying, noisy, and covered everything with fine dust. During this time frame, my son ended up catching some sort of bug, or so we thought, that seemed a lot worse at night. 3 nights in a row, he ended up jumping out of bed after throwing up all over the place and having diarrhea. It was awful. We would spend hours just rubbing his back and cleaning him up. I would then put him to bed in the spare bedroom, and he would pass out completely exhausted. After the 3rd night, I went on a cleaning spree and was basically scouring the shit out of everything to get the sick air out of the house, when I discovered that the damn dust from the road construction was coating everything with this grimy, blackish residue that was incredibly hard to remove, or what I thought was road dust. I was irate enough that I took a pic and posted it on FB and was bitching about the construction and asking if anyone else was having the same issues. A couple hours later, I get a message from a friend that asked if we had an oil furnace. I thought it was odd, but just said that, yes, we do, and asked why she asked. She then proceeded to tell me that all her ceiling fans and vents, etc., looked exactly like my pic did, when her furnace filter got clogged and wasn't burning off the oil properly, which in turn filled her house with carbon monoxide. I totally went into preservation mode and packed everyone into the truck and drove around the corner to the fire station. The firemen came in their trucks with their carbon monoxide detectors, and sure as shit, the basement was highly toxic and was filling the house. My son's room is directly above the furnace room, and when the heat was kicking in at night, he was getting poisoned. We are all lucky to be alive, especially my boy. Our landlord installed carbon monoxide detectors 2 days later after the house aired out and the furnace guy did his repairs. Story 34. When I was about 16, I visited my dad for Christmas. We were at a neighborhood New Year's Eve party, and I got cornered by this old guy. We're talking in his 70s. My mom worked with elderly people, so I was pretty used to chatting with them, and it wasn't until the conversation got intense that I got uncomfortable. He was watching me really closely and talking about tickling yourself to cure ticklishness and trying to get me to do it. It was uncomfortable, but I was a very passive teenager and not comfortable speaking up. Thankfully, my stepmother came along and got me away. The old guy lived behind my dad and stepmother, though, and I was sleeping in their camper van outside. With the curtains open, I could see his house and backyard, so I was pretty uncomfortable sleeping outside that night. Anyway, went home a couple of weeks later and didn't think much more about it. When I was chatting with my dad a few years later, he mentioned that the old guy had died. I made some appropriately sad noises, but he then followed up with, "It turns out that he was wanted in a city a few hours away for sexually harassing and a teenage girl." Instant chills all up and down my spine and arms. Old man was definitely creepy.